welcome back. For today's video, we're talking about the 1960 classic from Alfred Hitchcock, Psycho. So today's video is going to be diving into the history and some interesting facts about the movie Psycho. Before we get into that, if this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I appreciate it. Psycho was released in 1960 and was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. If you haven't seen Psycho before, here's the plot. A Phoenix secretary embezzles $40,000 from her employer's client, goes on the run, and checks into a remote motel run by a man under the domination of his mother. This movie was Alfred Hitchcock's first horror movie. The first scene shot in this movie was the one where Marion was asleep in her car after being on the run and the patrolman awakes her. So I said earlier in the plot that she stole $40,000 from her client. In today's time, $40,000 back then would roughly be around $352,000 that she would have stolen. When she's on the run, she goes and she gets a different car and she pays a $700 difference. Today's time, that would be about a $6,100 difference that she paid right then and there in the snap of a finger. So if you've seen Alfred Hitchcock movies before, then you'll notice that he likes to cameo in his movies. He cameos very early on in this movie, and that's only because he didn't want to divert attention away from the plot. He knew that when people were watching that they would be looking for that cameo. So the actress Janet Leigh, who plays Marion, she was only working for 3 weeks for this movie, and 1 whole week was committed to the famous shower scene. Alfred Hitchcock wanted to make this movie so much that he deferred his standard $250,000 salary in lieu of 60% of the movie's gross. Paramount Pictures believed this movie would do so poorly at the box office. His personal earnings from this movie exceeded $15 million. Adjusted for inflation, that amount would be just over $120 million in 2016. So this movie is actually based off a novel of the same name by Robert Bloch, and Alfred Hitchcock bought the rights to that novel for about $9,000, and it said that he went around and bought every single copy he could find to try and hide the ending of that book so that when he made the movie, it'd be more of a surprise for people. So for the famous shower scene, Alfred Hitchcock originally had that completely silent. That whole scene, no music, nothing. But the person who was in charge of the score, Bernard Herrmann, he took that scene, made a score for it anyway, and how Alfred Hitchcock instantly fell in love with what he did. When the cast and crew began work on the first day, they had to raise their right hands and promise not to divulge one word of the story. Alfred Hitchcock also withheld the ending part of the script from his cast until he needed to shoot it. That's commitment right there. That almost feels kind of like what Endgame did. There were stories going around that different versions of the script were given to different actors, but only the true version was given to Robert Downey Jr. I don't know the validity to that, but that's just something that I'd like to believe is actually true. Psycho has cemented its mark in cinematic history, and arguably, it's probably Hitchcock's most famous film. After Alfred Hitchcock died, 3 sequels and a remake were made, that being Psycho 2, Psycho 3, Psycho 4, and then the 1998 remake with Vince Vaughn. This is one of those movies that I absolutely love. I don't watch it as frequently as I should, admittedly, but I do still really enjoy this movie, and if you haven't seen this, I think that is one you should check out. It truly is a classic. Hopefully you learned something from this video. I know I sure did. And before we go,
they'll see, and they'll know, and they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.